I was walking home one night, and while I was walking along, I noticed some type of pop-up shop, place that I've never seen before. It had written on a sign, "Come in and take the free test and find out the real you and find yourself." I always used to hear my friends talking about different ways of finding themselves. Some used yoga meditation, others just liked to take long walks in the countryside. I could definitely do with being in tune with myself more, so I decided to walk in and see what it was all about. And if it is free, there's no hidden costs, well, what harm can it do? There was a man dressed like a doctor, and he greeted me with a big smile and said, "Welcome, sir. You have come to the right place if you are looking to find yourself." We exchanged pleasantries, and then he started the test. The thing was, he had covered my eyes with some kind of pair of goggles, and I could see weird shapes and colours, etc. And before I knew it, the test seemed to be over. I asked him, "Is that it? Do I need to answer any questions or anything?" He replied, "No, the test is done, and I hope you will be able to get in touch with yourself very soon and find yourself." I found it weird how he kept mentioning the term "find myself," but I thanked him and walked out of his place. As I was walking down the road, I noticed someone wearing the same jacket as me. I put that down to just some person having the same jacket as me. But things got very weird when the next two people I passed were wearing the same jacket. I couldn't understand how so many people could wear the same jacket as me. Then what I saw, I almost fainted with fear and shock and astonishment. Right in front of me, there were two people talking, but those two people were me. I froze on the spot, with my eyes fixed on two people who looked exactly like me. I thought back to what the man kept saying. He hoped I'd find myself. There were a group of people walking past me, and once again, they were all me. I ran back to where the man was, but when I got there, he had gone and there was no pop-up shop. I have explained to people how it had happened and how can they be me, but they say that I must be suffering from some delusion. They have now put me in an asylum, but I know I am not crazy. I know that whatever that guy did to me during the test has messed with me big time. I can't look at anybody without looking at myself. Things took a huge turn when I happened to look into a door and saw a doctor standing over a person wearing the exact same goggles I had worn for the test. I knew I wasn't crazy, and this is proof that something sinister is going on. Suddenly some guards caught me looking and handcuffed me. I hope and pray that whatever they have done to me will go away soon and I can get out of this hellhole, which no doubt is a base for whatever operation they are performing on people. And I wish I never, ever did that damn test. My name is Simon. I have a story to tell you about my experience when visiting a vintage store. I was always curious about items that could be picked up at those type of stores and about the history behind them. But one particular day, something really took my interest in a huge way. It didn't look anything special, just an old-style telephone, which I'm sure many houses still had the original style, or many had retro-style phones designed in the same style. But it wasn't the look that sparked my interest in this phone, it was what the man behind the counter told me. He said to me, "Hey there, I see you looking at that telephone. Let me tell you a little story behind it. You might have often heard of the Amityville Horror or Poltergeist movies. Well, this phone is from a haunted house just like that. This phone was handed in just over a week ago. Apparently, the owner said they were using it as their home phone, but say it's possessed by some demon. They didn't go into detail, but told me I could burn it or throw it away if I liked. I still don't know why they didn't burn it themselves, but anyway, I knew with a story like that behind it, and if people knew about the haunting, some of these paranormal ghost hunter folk would pay top dollar for it. I have newspaper clippings about the house. I cut the man off, afraid he would keep me an hour talking about it. How much is the phone, sir?" The man rubbed his chin and said, let's say $100. How about that? $100? Wow, that's a lot. The man said, "Like I said, there's a lot of paranormal folk out there that would pay top dollar for it." I was working all summer and had a few $100s saved, and the phone really stood out to me. Plus, I was really intrigued with those type of paranormal stories, and I guessed I couldn't get better than this, so handed him over $100. He smiled and said, "Thanks, young man, and remember, be careful with this thing. The owners don't want nothing to do with it because of all sorts of evil demons they say harness energy through it." I smiled and thanked the man, knowing what he said sounded cool to me, not something that would scare me. A few days later, I had it hooked up to my room instead of my old telephone that used to be there. I told a few of my friends in school, and they all told me I was crazy to spend money on a silly phone that was meant to be possessed. Nothing out of the ordinary happened until one night I was home alone. The phone rang and someone spoke. "Hello, I have a telegram for you. I am just wondering, do I have the right address?" I knew telegrams weren't around for years, but I remember my grandparents talking about them. I didn't pay much attention, but they said my name, so I just said yes. Also, I wondered why anyone was delivering a message to the house at night. I didn't pay much attention to it until 10 minutes later there was a knock on the door, and the boy dressed in old-style clothes like something out of the 19th century handed me a box. I took it, wondering what it was. Before I could open it, the phone rang again. This time it was different. It was like there were wires crossed, and I was listening in on a conversation. I could hear two people speaking to each other, and no matter how loud I said hello, they didn't hear me. I listened to hear what they were saying. One man said, "It's all sorted. The delivery was made to his house. We know it is Simon's house." And better again, he answered the door. My heart nearly jumped into my throat when I heard what they said next. "I will be going to his house right now to kill him as ordered." I threw the phone from my hand, not knowing what to do. I was just about to call the police when there was a knock on the door. I jumped with panic. Maybe it isn't them. I hoped. I slowly walked downstairs to peep out the door to see who was standing outside. It was a person wearing a ski mask. I ran upstairs to grab my father's gun to protect myself as the door opened. How did they know where the hiding spot outside for the spare key was? The person walked into the hall, holding the gun right at me. and I panicked and held up my dad's gun and shot the person dead before they shot me. Then after the gunshot, I didn't understand what had happened. My friends walked in and saw the blood and the person I had shot. One of them checked his pulse, shouting, "Oh my God, he's dead." I shouted, "What is this? What's going on?" It turned out my friends were just playing a prank on me over that stupid phone I was telling them about. I am now writing this letter from inside a prison cell where I am serving time waiting for a verdict in the court trial where I am pleading self-defense. I keep asking myself, did the phone have the power to make my friends play that stupid prank? Or was it their own idea? It was a beautiful summer's day, and I was walking along the countryside to unwind from a hard week's work. I was never down this road, and the reason is because I took a break from work for a week in as backward a place as I could get in the middle of Texas. This was my first day here, and I must admit the scenery is beautiful. I came across a farm, and suddenly, breaking the peaceful tranquility of the countryside atmosphere, I heard a screech. I wondered, what could it have been? So I investigated. I walked behind the barn and could see, way down a hill, a man with a huge knife, and it looked like he was about to cut the other man's head off. I felt goosebumps crawl all over my body, and I just froze, afraid I'd let them know I was here, and he would definitely kill me also for witnessing it. I hid behind the barn, then took another peek down the hill to see were they still there. Then I ran as fast as I could. About an hour later, I found a local police station and explained it to the sheriff. He said he would drive out there right away, and he took my number and he said he would keep me updated. The weird thing was, the sheriff told me he went down to the place I mentioned, but there was no barn and no farm, but just overgrown fields. I couldn't understand what was happening and pleaded with him to drive me down to where I saw it. I was dumbfounded when we got there, as it was just how the sheriff said. There was no barn, but just overgrown fields. The sheriff asked me, was I on something or had I the wrong place? But I knew I hadn't the wrong place. The question was, how and why was it so different? I went back to my motel a few hours later and lied on my bed pondering what was wrong. I tried to come up with some explanation but failed miserably. I got up and switched on the TV, and suddenly numbers popped up on the screen. 120-618-19. I wondered what they popped up for, and had a strange feeling to write them down. I tried to get some sleep then, but was woken by a sound outside the motel. There was an envelope down on the ground. I picked it up, wondering what it was. Wondering was it for me? There was a receipt for a knife. I thought it very strange, and wondered, was someone playing some kind of sick trick on me? But then my eyes caught something very, very strange. On the paper, I saw the receipt's order number looked very familiar, so I took out the piece of paper I had wrote the numbers on that were written on the TV. Sure enough, the numbers matched the receipt's order number, which was 120-618-19. I then thought maybe the motel had their own way of putting an order number on the TV. But I hadn't ordered anything. My curiosity was growing, and suddenly I had an idea. What if I searched those numbers online? I got out my laptop and searched them, and my jaw dropped and my heart thumped in my chest when I saw what I saw. On the 12th of the 6th, in 1819, there was an execution taking place on this exact date. Today was the 12th of the 6th, 2019, exactly 200 years after that date. I suddenly realised the significance of the numbers. I looked at the photo and saw the two men that I just saw earlier. I felt shivers run up my spine as I tried to fathom how did I become a witness to an execution that happened 200 years ago, unless for the unbelievable idea that I must have somehow travelled through a time warp to travel back 200 years to witness it. I couldn't understand what was happening. I jumped when suddenly I heard a knock on the door. I answered it, and what I saw, I would never, ever forget. It was the man who was killing the other man in the field, standing right before me. He raised his knife and was about to kill me when suddenly he disappeared. I told a few people, but they wouldn't believe me. I am very afraid that someday the man will come back to kill me, maybe because I witnessed the execution 200 years ago. But as I said, no one would believe me, but the fear is rooted deep in me, and I regret ever coming to this God-forsaken town.
Sarah was feeling very uptight. She hated the rain. It made her feel anxious and full of dread. She even hated the shower, as it reminded her of rain. The feeling of water on her skin might as well have just been sharp glass pouring onto her skin, cutting her. The pain felt the same. Jason was walking down a creepy, dark, lonesome road where the trees were so high and overlapping across the road it was even dark looking in the day. But it wasn't the darkness unsettled him. It was the feeling of the rain dripping off his hair onto his shoulders made him shiver in fear. He ran down the road to get home faster and in out of the rain. Lisa pulled up in her driveway and stepped out of her car. She dreaded making the short few steps in the rain. She knew most people, of course, wouldn't be afraid of getting wet, but every time it rained, she felt petrified. Jack was going for his jog when it suddenly started to rain heavy. He was 10 minutes from his house, so he began to sprint home. He had a huge irrational fear of the rain. He was panting and out of breath by the time he got home. and was relieved once he had his house door shut behind him and he was in from the rain. Mike was finished football practice and startled the other players when he freaked out on the football field. Once a heavy rain shower began, he just lost it. His friends looked, laughing, and one of the boys said, "It's only rain, it's not going to kill you." It was a rainy night, and it was the high school reunion, and everyone was enjoying themselves, except 5 people who were reluctant to even come along at all. Those 5 people were Sarah, Jason, Lisa, Jack, and Mike. They all were called into a room that had a barrel with water in it. Mike stood in the middle and Martin, the school bully, was sitting on a chair tied to it with a cloth wrapped around his mouth. When everyone was in the room, Mike walked over and locked the door, then turned back to Martin and said, "Do you remember all the times you used to drop us into a barrel of water in the back of the school and at house parties? Where did you even get the water to put in the barrel to torture us? Do you realize the embarrassment and humiliation you put us through?" Mike pulled the cloth from Martin's mouth and he started pleading, "For God's sake, we were just kids. I'm sorry, okay?" Mike and Jack dragged him and held him over the barrel water and lowered him into it. The others looked on in horror, shouting to them pull him out, and that was enough. When Mike and Jack finally pulled him out of the water, they noticed he wasn't breathing. He had drowned to death within the first few seconds in the water. They have never spoken about what had happened on the night of the reunion to anyone outside of that room, and no one suspected them as the body was discovered in the pool the next day, and the police had it down as an accidental drowning. Mike was the one who hid the body and dumped it in the pool when he got a chance. Sarah, Jason, Lisa, Jack, and Mike all took steps towards finding out how to deal with their irrational fear of rain. They didn't realize they all shared the same fear. The doctors and psychiatrists assigned to each person had no clear idea of why they had the fear, and it was made harder for them to not know what had happened to them when they didn't even know what happened during school and during that unforgettable night at the high school reunion. After all, how would anyone know why they had a fear of rain when they did not know what had happened to them and what had happened to me? After all, who would be able to put everything together that I am haunting my killers each and every time it rains?
Friday night 2016. I was 8 at the time, when my brother, who was 10, and I were home alone. We stayed in our bedroom to play on our PS2. My brother went downstairs to make some meals for us to eat, while I was waiting. I needed to go to the bathroom so badly, so I went. Once I came back to play on my PS2, I saw my brother looking confused. I asked him, "What's wrong?" He replied, "Did you open the window?" I thought he was joking, so I laughed and said, "No, are you trying to scare me?" Then he didn't answer. I didn't mind, he sometimes ignores me. I went back to play on my PS2 when I heard a loud banging on the window. I couldn't see who it was since it was dark outside. I went outside with my brother and a flashlight. when we saw who it was. It was a big, tall white man with really blonde hair and a black hoodie. I quickly ran into the house, went to my kitchen to grab a knife, and ran with my brother to the bathroom. While I was in the bathroom, I realised I left the door open. I cried in fear with my brother. We called 911. Then, when the cops arrived, they found the man dead. Days passed and I wondered if he wanted us to see him kill himself or worse. I love shopping. You might love shopping also. But what would you do if your shopping experience turned into a nightmare? I have a true story that was just that. It happened in a town in California called Oxnard. The town has a population of just over 200,000 people, and even though this town is the home of this horror story, it was ironically voted one of the safest cities in the United States of America back in 2013. The crime level is low and the income level is high. To add to that, it is a beautiful looking town. But no matter what town you go to, there are always places you'd want to watch out. There are good and bad people everywhere, I suppose. Back to what I told you at the start of this story. Shopping. This particular shopping experience I am about to tell you about is far from your typical enjoyable experience. This is an account of a shopper at a huge mall, which is the mecca of American consumerism. The place to everyone go to get basically anything they desire, whether it be a book, clothes, food, or a toy. Toys will feature heavy in this story. Bear in mind this particular store is meant to be haunted, but also bear in mind that not every store is haunted, of course. The ghost that people talk about in this store is of a little girl of Mexican-American descent. She is said to like to play in the toy aisle. There is nothing strange about that. What kid doesn't? But what is strange is she is a ghost. Employees and patrons have seen her roam around in the girls' toys section, but sometimes she can be seen playing with the trucks as well. She doesn't come across as sinister or dangerous to people who spot her. She is meant to usually greet them with a ghoulish smile. Why people say ghoulish is because her eyes are milk white, but her entire body is covered in blood. One customer said the first time they saw her, they just about died and went up to Jesus. They thought it was some kid who had hurt themselves. When the person saw the girl disappear in front of her very eyes, she knew she was a ghost. But the girl never talks. Some people believe that the girl was murdered years and years ago in the field where the huge mall now stands. That is a rumour which was made in the circle of people that came across the girl. Whether it is true or not, they don't know. The people who see the girl are often greeted by her smile. One person who has seen the girl said it stands to reason that if she has been haunting that area for all these years, forever trapped in the spirit and mentality of a little girl, she would find the sudden appearance of a bunch of toys around her to be a golden opportunity. As horrific as this story is, no one has exactly any cause to fear the ghost. The main reason for people being so disturbed is the sheer volume of blood on her is enough to freak people out. A former employee has said, "We just let her be mostly. She doesn't hurt anyone, at least so far, and there's really not much we could do about her if we wanted to. It's sad, you know, that little girl playing all alone in there in the toys with no friends or family to be with her. So yeah, we just let her be, and we hope that she never decides that she doesn't like us anymore."
Good evening. Tonight I'm your host, Mr. Ramsey, and I'll be collaborating alongside the Assassin Rapper to present you this scary, uber animated horror story. If you enjoy this collaboration, then please let us know by dropping a like and letting us know down in the comments. Anyway, without further ado, let's begin. This happened about 6 months ago, and I recently took an Uber for the first time since this incident, so I thought I'd share. I was leaving a work function at a bar around midnight in a large city, about an hour away from the suburban home I share with my partner. For reference, I'm a woman in my mid-20s with an average build. Not tall, not strong, definitely not threatening in any way, and I was a bit buzzed that night. I'm talking like 3 drinks, so not incapacitated in the slightest. Anyway, I'd ordinarily take a company car home, but I hadn't reserved one since I didn't know what time I'd be leaving, so I just decided to Uber. The company reimburses me for the bill anyway, so it was no difference to me. Once the Uber pulls up, I say goodbye to my colleagues and get in the back seat. I'm always very nice to my Uber drivers, so I introduce myself. This driver, let's call him Ed, since I don't actually know his real name, seemed totally normal. No red flags, and we make pleasant conversation for about 15 minutes until we are squarely out of the city on the way to the suburbs. From the pleasant conversation, I learned he lives in a certain neighbourhood not far from my home. Note that his neighbourhood was relatively nearby, would be completely out of the way en route we are taking to my home. The conversation reaches its natural end, so I just stay a bit quiet and start looking at my phone, Reddit, whatever. The quiet is interrupted by his voice, suggesting I take a nap if I feel tired. It didn't even strike me as weird at first, so I just thanked him for the offer, but I wasn't that tired. He then said, "Oh, I always get sleepy when I'm drunk. Are you sure?" At this point, something in my body made me even more wide awake than before. I replied that I wasn't drunk and, like I had said, I just had a few drinks, so no need to nap. "I'll be home soon enough anyway." He dropped it after that, but I still thought it was weird he'd say that. About 5 minutes later, he says that the highway had some weird construction going on, and that the single lane traffic ahead would make my trip way longer than it needed to be. He asks if it's okay to take another route. I oblige, already on edge and just wanting to be at home. My partner calls at that moment, asking when I'll be home, and I make sure to make it very clear I was talking to my significant other. Something was weird about this guy, and I wanted him to know that someone is expecting me at a specific time and knows where I am. After I hung up the phone, the Uber driver stays quiet and we get off the highway, on a different exit than I'd ever used, but I guess that'd be expected on a different route home. I'm bullshitting on my phone because I don't want to talk to this guy anymore, not even looking up until he says, "My house is only 5 minutes from here, okay?" Pit in my stomach, I'm probably a good 25 minutes away from my house right now. A distance enlarged, I'd later learn artificially, by his shortcut. I say some nonsense about how I like the neighbourhood, and how my boyfriend and I were thinking of moving here instead, blah blah, basically anything I can think of to make it seem like I don't think this is weird and I'm not picking up on any signals. Surprisingly, he doesn't say anything in response, and now starts driving on a road in a direction I knew led to my house. Phew, crisis averted, right? Except, not exactly. 15 minutes to go and my surroundings are more familiar. Just as I'm starting to feel more at ease, he starts asking questions about my boyfriend. What does he do? How long have you guys been together? And other seemingly normal questions. Finally, with about 10 minutes to go, he asks if my boyfriend makes me happy. He does, very much, so I gush a bit and say yes, he makes me very happy. Then he asks if I make him happy. I thought that was weird, but humour is my defence mechanism, so I say, well, I should hope so. 8 minutes away. He turns onto a side street and pulls over onto the side of the road, looks back at me over his headrest, and asked if I'd make him happy too. I said, what? Mostly because I can't even believe what's happening. He asks me again, do you want me to make you happy tonight? I took a second to think through my options. I'm alone with this guy who's behind the wheel. The street is dark and I don't see any lights on at nearby houses. Close to 1 AM at this point on, and at a weekend, and I don't know what the hell this guy has in the car. I default to the response many women know to be the true barrier to men's advances. I don't think my boyfriend would like that very much. His weird grin falls away from his face and he says, he doesn't have to find out. Come on, make me happy. I know a few ways you can start. I tell him my boyfriend is expecting me home any minute, and besides I love him and don't want to hurt him. Can you please just take me home? I carry a small knife and a little canister of mace, but all I could think of was to appeal to this guy's sensitive side. Somehow it worked and he didn't say another word after that, just turned back around and silently drove me home. Weirdly enough, I say thanks as I get out of the car. Old habits die hard, I guess. And that was that. I got into my house and start crying immediately for some reason as soon as I hug my partner. He tells me I need to contact Uber immediately and tell them what happened so that the guy doesn't try to take advantage of anyone else. I agree and pull up the app to file the complaint. Except when I look at my last ride, the picture on my profile was 100% not the same guy who drove me home. The car was the same, but not the driver. The guy in the photo was brown and wore a turban, maybe early 40s. The guy who drove me home was white and seemed just a bit older than me. Uber never followed up with me and just refunded my money. I did tell the police what happened because my partner insisted, but they didn't take me seriously since nothing actually happened. I was worried for a while since the guy knew where I lived, but apparently it's long forgotten since I just took an Uber today. Moral of the story: always make sure the photo in your Uber driver's profile matches the person who's driving the car. Thank you all for listening. I want to thank the Assassin Rapper for his fantastic animation work, and I hope you all enjoyed. Remember to subscribe and hit that bell notification so you don't miss any future collaborations.
My friend and I always used to walk through a wonderful spacious park when we were younger. It was full of tall trees and it was very nicely maintained. In this large park there was an abandoned mansion. I can't really say how long it had been there, but on that day the front door of the mansion was wide open. The two of us decided to check out what was inside the place. As we inched through the door, the very first thing we noticed was that the mansion's floor was littered with crumpled up pieces of paper. We looked at each other and observed that there was no furniture, nothing except for those wrinkled balls of paper. The mansion had 6 rooms on its main floor, and every room we entered bore more and more scrunched up pieces of paper. We decided to open up one of the paper balls to see what was inside. Our curiosity got the better of us. I picked up a single wrinkled piece, and as my friend picked up another, I unfolded my paper, smoothing out its spins and dents. At that moment, it was almost as if a piece of a rainbow emerged before our eyes, and I was suddenly standing next to a large window in one of the upstairs rooms of the house. I was looking outside into the large park when I looked down at the piece of paper I held. It read, "Look outside the large window that oversees the park in the upstairs parlour." I dropped the piece of paper and it fluttered gracefully to the ground. Meanwhile, I stared at my open hands in a bout of horror. Dazed and utterly perplexed, I found my way downstairs and met up with my friend. He was in the kitchen, sitting at a round table that hadn't been there before. Where did that come from? I wondered. My friend stared at his opened paper and reread the words several times before he looked at me and turned the page my way. It said, "Go to the kitchen and sit at the round table." We stared at each other for a few moments, vaguely afraid, but then we began to chuckle. Within seconds, we were laughing our heads off, marvelling at our newfound game. We could hardly believe what had happened, but being young as we were, the mystery was endlessly exciting. We decided again to open up another scrunched piece of paper. As we opened up the crumpled papers on the floor, we experienced the same sudden flash of rainbow colours. But this time I ended lying down in the field behind the mansion. When I peered onto the paper in my right hand, it read, "Lie down in the field behind the mansion." I giggled uncontrollably. After a few minutes of running around the house, I found my friend collecting multiple balls of paper in his arms, eager to experience more of these strange, exciting phenomena. We both got the gist of what was happening at this point. We had no idea as to how it was possible, but we decided to have more fun with it. The supernatural always had a way of captivating our hearts. After a few more run-throughs with these strange mini teleportation devices, I began to feel apprehensive. I wondered if at one point I would be placed somewhere I didn't want to be, or I'd be made to do something that I didn't enjoy. We continued though. Minute after minute, we unfolded many papers and travelled through bedrooms, closets, trees. But then, after having been on the roof of the mansion, I stood before my friend, dead on the living room floor. I didn't scream. I couldn't murder him. I read on my crumpled page as I felt a surge of vomit and bile rising into my throat. Nothing came out, but the sickness in my throat spread to my stomach, my head, and my heart. I didn't know what to do at this point. I began to scream and shout, praying to God for this to be a nightmare. I wanted it to go away. I wanted to rewind our day and be outside again, together walking underneath the trees. I willed myself to be calm, and I hesitantly unfolded another paper in the hopes that the problem would correct itself. Once again, I saw the colours of the rainbow, and I found myself standing behind a tree several meters away from the house. I could clearly see the front door within a few instants. I saw both myself and my friend walk through through that door. I began to wonder if I had died or if I was having an out-of-body experience. I looked at the sheet in my hand, and the only words scrawled upon it were, "Time will repeat itself, and a paradox will take place, and it will be allowed." That gave me an idea. In my pocket remained the paper that made me kill my friend. Without looking at it, I crumpled it back up. Quietly, I followed my other self, who had separated from my friend, as he explored the rooms of the house. As I crept behind him, he turned around very suddenly. Before he could utter a syllable, I forced the paper in front of my eyes, and in a flash of rainbow colours, I was able to kill my other self. The laws of time allowed me to take over my dead self's place in this world, and also because of the fact that it was allowed to happen, as it was written on the second piece of paper that I had on me, which reversed time. It must have control over time and paradoxes, which made me now the new alive and present of my other dead self. I hid my limp, bleeding other dead self in a cupboard in the upstairs bathroom to rot. To my great relief, I heard my friend call my name from downstairs. My friend who managed to stay alive, and well, my best friend. When I went downstairs, he greeted me excitedly, smiling childishly, and being blissfully unaware of the situation. I pretended that nothing had happened. In a heartbeat, I told him that the house creeped me out and that it would be much better if we left. After that day, we never went near the mansion again. I don't know if anyone saw or heard about anything that happened between us, but I recently heard from another friend that the house had been demolished. I dreaded the probable prospect that my corpse was uncovered in the bathroom cabinet. Julie and Jake were having a difficult time in their marriage. They decided to take a train journey across America. What Julie hadn't known was Jake, her husband, only organised the journey to organise a hitman to kill her on the train. Julie was sitting down reading a book, while Jake said he was going to get a drink in the train's bar. As Julie was reading, a man sat down next to her, introducing himself as Andy, and asked her for the time. Julie found it strange, knowing these days anyone should have the time when they have a phone. The man introduced himself to Julie. This was all part of Jake's plan. 15 minutes later, Jake had arrived, and as planned, he told her an old friend of hers was in the next carriage. He recognised me and was asking for her. Of course, there was no school friend. The plan was that the hitman pushed Julie out of the train door when she went to see what friend. Jake hoped she'd take the bait and smiled when she did. Julie walked towards the door. Jake would have loved to have watched it happen, but knew it would be too obvious. The hitman was wearing gloves and an aesthetic face, just in case there were cameras they missed scoping the train out a few days ago. Jake had planned to walk up to the next carriage in about 15 minutes to get clarification the job was done. He was about to walk into the next carriage when the man said, "Hi sir, nice journey, isn't it?" Jake smiled, knowing those were the exact words he was meant to say. Jake replied, "Is the job done?" The man said, "Well, I got to chat a lot with your wife. She seems a very nice lady, but most importantly," he was looking behind Jake's shoulder at this moment. Jake turned around to see what he was looking at, and with his shock, he saw Julie staring at him with hatred in her eyes. The man continued to speak. "More importantly, your wife. She seems to be a very sweet lady, and may I say, a very beautiful lady." Jake was dumbfounded and said in a confused tone, "What's going on here?" Julie spoke. "Let me explain. And this hitman here who goes by the name of Andy, which I call Andrew, is not just a regular hitman. We have been dating for the last 6 months. Wait, should I change that to we have been having an affair for the last 6 months?" And she gave a sinister smile. Jake didn't know what was happening. He spoke quietly so no other passengers could hear him. "What is happening here? How do ye know each other?" Andrew explained. "When you first made contact with me, did you not realize it was me who first made contact with you?" Jake still couldn't understand how a hitman he hired on the dark web could have been having an affair with his wife he ordered to kill before he even made contact. Jake said, "Wait a minute. You said you made contact with me first." Suddenly Andrew said, "Well, we told a tiny lie, but it's not about me making contact first." With that, Andrew pulled off his prosthetic mask, revealing the face of their marriage counsellor they had for the last 6 months. It was Andrew and Julie were having an affair, and because of Julie not trusting her husband, she checked his phone one time when he left it on the bed for 5 minutes while he shaved. Just as he left, she picked it up in order to not have to put in any code that she knew she wouldn't be able to guess. He'd just been on it, so she didn't have to put in any access code. She went through it and came across a text that said all the information and money needs to be transferred to this email address. I will have the job done once the money is sent through Bitcoin to this account. Julie had no idea what it was, but sent an email saying, "I will send the money, but I need to know exactly what you're going to do. I need to know exactly every detail of what I'm paying for." Julie changed the real email, so no matter what email Jake sent would not get sent and would not be received by the hitman. But she changed it by adding a dot that was barely seen. But Julie kept contact and brought the hit forward, of course, with the real hitman thinking he was in contact with Jake. Julie had been on the train waiting for the hitman to arrive, and when he did, there were undercover police ready to arrest him as soon as he asked for the time. They waited until a guy with a prosthetic face of Jake clarified with the hitman did he finish the job. Then the undercover police moved in. The real Jake was shocked to learn that the hitman was arrested a week ago, and he was going to be arrested now. Julie looked at him and said, "You son of a bitch." I work for a small newspaper company, and I usually just write about things happening in the community. One story though got me particularly interested, and it was about a woman who lived in filth. Her neighbours had been complaining about odd foul smells coming from her house. It isn't the type of story that I usually do, but it was different, and that's what got me interested. When I got to her house, I could clearly see from the front of the house how filthy it all was. The thought of going inside started to become a regrettable decision. I mean, first encounters count, right? And I didn't mean to be so judgmental straight away, but looking at her house, it gave off the sort of impression that this was a person who didn't look after herself that much. I also talked with some of the locals, and what they told me about her didn't give off a good judgment of character. This woman was clearly out of touch with everything around her. At the same time, I wanted to know more about her, and me, being a nosy person, I couldn't help but wanting to know more about her. Clearly, something had happened in her life to make her live like this. I had already called her to make sure she was okay with me looking into her life, and she agreed to show me her way of life and to explain to me why she lives the way she does. The filth had a stench, and I was surprised that she hadn't died from any bacteria, because it seemed like the right environment for bacteria and viruses to survive. Her mental state was questionable, and she had old cassette players and VHS players all over the place, which don't really exist anymore. When I asked her why she lived like this, all that she could tell me was that as long as filth smelled like the way it should, it was all good. Everything was a mess, and I don't know why, but it kind of all got me being grateful for all the things I had in my life. On the other hand, I am sure someone with OCD would love to clean every speck of this place, and with everything out of order, it told me that her life must have been out of control. Things were broken, and she survived on government benefits and some inheritance from her parents. I could hear small things moving around, and they must have been rats or some other animal. It's weird how animals can survive in such mess. I guess their immune system must be better than ours. Actually, maybe this woman's immune system might be amazing at this point because she has survived this long in this mess. She told me about her mother and father. She was brought up in a 5-bedroom house. She also had 2 younger siblings, and after she had told me that she had siblings, I quickly assumed that her siblings had wanted nothing to do with her, which I was gravely wrong about. I tried asking more questions about her upbringing, but all she told me was, just go to the house of my childhood and notice how the filth gives off an amazing aroma. I then went to her childhood home, and I could clearly see that it had been abandoned for many years, and Mother Nature had clearly took over the house. It's sad how houses begin to go under after they had been abandoned, and it reminded me of the only thing I had remembered in my sociology class before I changed courses to journalism. It's people that give meaning to buildings and materialistic things, not the object itself. I kicked the door down as I could clearly see that the front door was past its prime. From what the house looked like, I had expected odour and stench to hit my nose, but instead I got to smell the most amazing aroma I had ever smelt in my life. I then started searching her childhood home for anything interesting to find. This woman's childhood home was exactly like her own house, and I don't know why, but I started to become irritated by this woman. In my generation, we are finding it difficult to even buy a home, and even if someone from my generation has managed to somehow buy a home, it's hard to keep it maintained. Yet this woman has managed to live in a big childhood home as well as having her own home, which clearly she had decided to neglect it. It's unfair, but I guess life is just unfair. It was all a mess, and I was beginning to find it all predictable with the neglect of having any care or pride in one's own life. Maybe her parents were abusive, and I wondered more about her siblings, because now I wanted to know why she was so alone in the world. We all need someone, no matter who we are, but then again, loneliness is a big problem in Western civilization, and we even have someone in the government whose main job is to tackle things like loneliness. Loneliness becomes more apparent as we get older, and this woman was old now, and with the inventions of social media and computer games, it's made loneliness even more stronger. The only good but odd thing about this woman's childhood home is the nice aroma and smell. I decided to follow the aroma because I couldn't resist it anymore. The aroma could be smelt the most from behind the sofas, and you know how in cartoons, when one cartoon character follows a pack of sweets, all lined up because it was being set up? That's what happened to me. When I looked behind the sofas, I gasped with horror and with utter disbelief, because I never thought that I would ever look upon something so disgusting and completely random. I saw 4 skeleton bones, still giving off a perfume-like scent. And this is not the type of smell you would think death could give off. I mean, with an amazing smell present, you would think something was full of life to give such a scent. I went back to see the woman, and I didn't call the police just yet because I wanted to know more, and I wanted her permission first of how to proceed with everything that I had just found. When I told this woman of filth, of what I had experienced in her childhood home, she started tearing up. Instead of calling the police, she just turned on the VHS player, and I started to watch something, like an explanation video. At the same time, I also have to shamefully admit, finding all of this would have progressed my career in the journalism world. Even though I had just found something terrible, my career coming to my mind showed how I could have profited from this. Anyhow, the video told me more things about what was really going on. Hello, my name is Dr. Rogerson Peake. I have invented a pill that could make any dead person smell nice. When a body starts decomposing, it usually starts to smell. But with this pill, a decomposing body will be the most sweet-smelling thing you have ever smelt. The cassette player kept on playing. After watching the whole video, a few thoughts came to mind. Yes, the pill would give the dead person a bit more dignity by smelling nice, and it will also help people who deal with dead bodies, like in hospitals. But at the same time, this might be a great advantage for a murderer or serial killer. Imagine someone had murdered someone in your home, but the murdered person had this pill before being murdered. It could be some time before you notice something is off. Something smelling nice usually doesn't give an image of death or tell you that something is decomposing. It's always the nasty smell which makes us think something is off. Like when I was in this woman's childhood home, I honestly didn't think I would find something to be dead. Do you see how this might be an advantage for a serial killer or murderer? and I started to understand why this woman lived like the way she lived now for such a long time. I felt bad for being so judgmental or for thinking about my career gain of this whole story. I also started to glue together who those skeletons belonged to. From common sense, those skeletons behind the sofa in her childhood home must have been her 2 parents and 2 siblings, and I thought they had just abandoned her because of the way she had lived her life. "Is someone trying to kill you?" I asked this woman. My whole family took part in the experiment to eat the pill. We were struggling for money at the time, and they promised us that they would pay us lots of money to eat the pill. They weren't 100% honest with us, and none of us knew what the pill was made for exactly, she told me. She started crying a little bit, and the more I understood her story and why she lived the way she did, it was sad, just so sad. How we humans can be so unsympathetic or not care enough to understand someone but rather to judge and cast aside. After taking the pill, one midnight someone broke into my home, and I was just a child back then, and this man had murdered my mother, father, and both my siblings. I hid in a secret wall cupboard in my room, which my father had built. For weeks, this strange man who broke into my house observed my whole family's dead bodies. They all started to smell nice as they decomposed. I overheard his talk on the phone, and they wanted to use this pill in war and other scenarios where death is common, but they wanted to hide the deaths and murders. If something smells nice, no one would ever think something has died, she explained to me. She managed to escape when the strange man went for a smoke in her garden, and I couldn't believe what I had just been told. This story was not just a story, but probably one of the biggest scandals in the 21st century. I had to write about this and get this story out, and I phoned the police about the 4 skeletons in this woman's childhood home. Something had to be done, and we all know how shady the government can be and some of the things they can be capable of. This woman deserved justice. I hugged her and she pleaded me not to go to the police, but obviously I decided to go against her. I went back to my flat, and as soon as I entered, a beautiful scented aroma hit my nose. But I never sprayed anything inside my flat recently. I checked my whole flat and I found a dead body in my bathtub. The dead body had a note attached to it, which read, "Be wary of your steps, lad." I straight away drove to the woman's house, and this time, instead of the scent of filth hitting my nose, it was a perfume-like aroma, and I knew she had been murdered in her own living room. There was a note on her body which read, "We are watching, and the dead body in your flat has been taken now." And I couldn't believe it. I checked her childhood home, and everything inside had been taken, and no sign of police of any kind. They knew I would check on this woman after finding a dead body in her apartment, as well as her childhood home. I am being watched now.